Chapter 4. Beginning of Life in Europe. Arseniy smiled pleasantly at us and was very good-natured. We embraced him, as if we had known him for many years, and went by tram to his home. That day it was warm, the sun was shining, and a good atmosphere around pleased the eye. I had only known Arseniy in absentia before, we communicated with him via the internet. I only knew that he had parents and a younger sister with an interesting name, Malika. Their apartment was very bright and cozy, with beautiful furniture and an altar with the Arseniy's family consisting of devotees of the Krishna Consciousness Society, and all family members also had spiritual names denoting certain manifestations of the gentleman's qualities. The deities looked very heavenly, they were wearing gorgeous outfits and they looked truly divine. Arseniy's mom, Inna, is the most open, friendly, and caring woman. She fed my cousin and me delicious vegetarian food and had a pleasant conversation with us. Their dad at that time was at work. We will meet him later. In general, I will say that Arseniy's family impressed me very pleasantly. They were elegant, well-mannered, friendly, and hospitable people, with a bright energy, who were also very practical and hard-working. In addition, Arseniy's father, Vitaly, was a collector of antiques and fine art, turning their apartment into an art museum. I remember when we first arrived and stayed with them for a few days in their guest room, which was also filled with beautiful items. The exhibits are varied, including Native American masks and African dolls, as well as a fair number of items from the Soviet era. I felt like I had entered a different world, one that was distinct from the one I had left. And this other world was more noble, sublime, and vivid than mine at that time. Although in the days that followed, I missed home very much. My brother and I came to stay with them precisely because they kindly agreed to shelter us for a while until we could register with the municipality as refugees. It was good that the refugee registration center was not far from their home, they could easily get there by tram. The next day, my brother, Arseniy's mother Inna, and I went on a trip. Arseniy's whole family is beautiful, his mother, his sister, himself, and his father. They are fair-haired people with pleasant, smiling faces, and they are not at all confrontational. Yes, they have their disagreements from time to time, as in any other family, but overall, they are doing well. Not like back in the Hranin village, when my brother and I watched and listened to the scandals of the locals in the style of, "Whore, where have you been hanging out? Hooker, I'm going to kill you," and so on. In general, the amicable showdown of sweet husbands and wives. Thank God, in Arseniy's family, it was not customary to resolve issues in this way. There was more calmness, jokes, and humor, especially on Vitaly's part, and that was how they communicated with each other. A good family, where parents devoted themselves to raising children and created homes. After all, many situations that happen to us are often determined by our childhood and what our parents and environment instilled in us. And if there is an unhealthy and nervous atmosphere at home with scandals, quarrels and abuse, then the children grow up and become the same as their adult parents. They broadcast this in their own lives, destroying their own destinies and the lives of those close to them. So, personally, when I see prosperous families where love and care prevail, where there is financial security and no room for violence, children grow up healthy and motivated to do something positive. Arseniy's family was just like that. I'll also mention the father of the family, Vitaly. He was a slightly large-built man with a slight sly smile and a good sense of humor. He was a collector of everything under the sun, as well as a great connoisseur and expert on rare items. He collected beautiful dishes, paintings, figurines, money, technology, furniture, and more. Of course, all this took up a lot of space in the apartment, but he was so good at arranging everything that I personally admired his talent and his desire for high standards. One day, I read in a book that if a person has a penchant for collecting antiques, it means that such a soul came to earth from the higher spheres. And it is quite possible that Vitaly really came down from the higher planets. I'm not joking. According to Vedic cosmology, the universe is divided into 3 levels of planetary systems, upper, middle, and lower. It is likely that he came from the higher ones, but I cannot confirm this. I am more interested in where I came from, and something tells me that I did not come from there, but from the lower realms. Because being born in Mariupol, a very difficult and dangerous place, in a depressed city, is not just a coincidence, because we all come from somewhere places on the planet, because it seems to me that we have earned by our previous deeds to live in this or that location in different roles, with different talents, inclinations, and tastes. Something we acquire already here, in new incarnations, something we bring with us from past lives, but in any case, we do not come here already clean. This is purely my opinion. So the abode of Arseny's family was presented to me as a kind of incarnation of a more noble world than the one I came from, with more elevated souls. In addition to what has already been said, I will not lie if I say that their whole family is also very gifted. For example, Arseny's sister Malika knows how to dress cool. She is a participant in a show on Dutch television. Arseniy is a diligent and gifted student. He inspires respect. A well-off and noble family, my respect to them. The next day, Arseny's mother went with us to register at the refugee center, where we were greeted by courteous Dutch people who provided us with bathroom supplies and some clothes, although we didn't really need them. After that, we had to go to the municipality to get free housing there. We couldn't stay with Arseny's family for too long, and only planned to stay there for a few days. My brother decided to return to Germany, because the conditions there were better, in terms of payments, for sure, and besides his girlfriend was supposed to come exactly there as well. And overall, there was no point in him staying in Holland with me. Our journey together had come to an end, so my brother returned to Germany, and a few days later I went to the municipality to settle in the place that had been offered to me. I was placed in The Hague, in a hostel, on the shores of the North Sea. The street where I lived was very old. It looked as architecturally skillful as possible, with beautiful houses with frills, carvings, and lights. The real Europe, just like on the TV, where I've seen it many times in news reports. I did not expect that one day I would live in an old part of an old European city, on the shores of the North Sea. The world is full of unpredictability. In the hostel where I was staying, there were volunteers from Brazil. They were looking after the order in the building. Although it was a good place with great conditions, I started to feel uncomfortable there on the second day, because there was no need to cook, as everything was already prepared for us. They also said that it was not necessary to wash the dishes. There was nothing to do, just to live. Personally, this is not typical and unusual for me, so for me such comfortable conditions were superfluous. The allowance of €240 from the state, as it turned out, was not going to be given to us in full because we were already receiving assistance in this dormitory. They brought us ready-made meals and did some work for us. I was not satisfied with this. Luckily, I didn't stay in this location for long. On the third day, I was relocated. They came by car and took my things to another place, which I passed by once when I took a bicycle from Arseniy. This place is located near the city center, a former nursing home that became a shelter for Ukrainian refugees for several years. And one of the coolest things about this house is that it's located right next to a railway station. For years, I have been dreaming of living near a railway station, and now my dream has come true. It's amazing. I liked the place. I was given a cozy room at the end of the corridor, a quiet room with beige and white colors. It was a quiet place where two people could live comfortably, but I was the only one there. About a year later, I gave this room to my friends, Victoria and her daughter Dasha, who inspired me to start writing. The residents of the place were mostly women. There were several families with children on our floor. 2 floors below, there were also young mothers and other different types of people. However, not all refugees were Ukrainians. Among them were also men from the east. One Ukrainian woman dated a Turkish man, became pregnant by him, and later gave birth to a child. However, something happened to her, and a few days after giving birth, she threw her little child out of the window, which caused the baby to die days later. Then it was a tragedy in our location. I remember that day I was at work when I found out about it. And yet, despite the tragedy, I enjoyed living in that location. Pleasant receptionists, mostly good neighbors, and a suitable location for the building. Most of all, I became friends with Victoria and Dasha, who came from the Poltava region and managed to find employment in one of the clinics in The Hague. To me, they were like one whole, inseparable, always together, harmoniously complementing each other, like mother and daughter. Beautiful, striking, intelligent, talented women. They dressed excellently, pleasantly. They were smiling, and they always looked great. I especially liked Victoria. She was so lively, so active, so dynamic. And Dasha is no slouch. She's obsessed with changing the world, always coming up with new ideas, trying to grow and create interesting things to make people's lives easier. She's always fantasizing about something, sharing her new experiences, and showing an impressive level of curiosity about the world. Dasha speaks so passionately about various topics that it's always interesting to listen to her, no matter what she's trying to convey. Definitely, it was fun with her in its own way. In general, these two beautiful persons became the closest to me. They stayed in the location until I left and went to Brazil, but I'll tell you about that later. In the meantime, I will return to Holland, to the place where Ukrainian refugees are being housed. In fact, Ukrainians were not refugees under international law, as far as I understand. They were given the status of temporarily displaced persons, which is a slightly different position than a refugee. However, everyone had the right to work, including me, so few people stayed at home, staying on benefits. Most of them went to work, which I did. Of course, I liked being in the Netherlands, in a museum country, where houses stand on the water, where tulips grow and old windmills adorn themselves, where one of the world's cultural centers, famous city Amsterdam. Undoubtedly, the Netherlands is a magical place. Sometimes I saw it as an unfriendly country, and sometimes as a good chance for a better future, but after a year of living there, I realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life there. Sometimes I'm asked by some acquaintances, why? The answer is, I don't know, but I don't feel that this is my country, and the place where I want to live the rest of my life. However, I admit, the country is cool, with good prospects and opportunities, with a convenient location, a stable economy, and the mind of work. And for those who are particularly bored, there is grass, streets of red lanterns, and a lot of all kinds of entertainment. Amsterdam, my friend, and everything that is called modern Kali Yuga. This is how the Vedic scriptures refer to our age of strife and controversy. The second name of Holland is the Netherlands. It is a small country, part of which is artificial. I have even been told that it was the Dutch who helped the Arabs to build their famous islands in the sea, as they were very good at it. The soil here is sandy, and it rains a lot, and there is little sun. The Dutch language is somewhat similar to English and German, but it is neither. I won't say that I'm a fan of his, but I'll be honest, I started learning it and then gave up because at some point I realized that I wouldn't be staying in the country, so I didn't see the point in spending more time on it. There aren't many Dutch people in the big cities, but there are plenty of immigrants. In this regard, the country is just like the rest of the world, filled with immigrants, especially Arabs. There are a lot of Turks, Moroccans, Surinamese, Africans, and Poles. The Dutch, as a nation, are white people, often tall and attractive, and seem content with their lives. A good standard of living, a stable economy, and a lower level of theft than in the CIS are what give them optimism, as it is difficult to live in a constant state of survival. While still living in pre-war Ukraine, I remember well how my whole life was like a quest for survival, where almost every day was a new challenge, a test of strength. And life there checked me everywhere. Then you can't get to the hospital, then you can't pay for the utilities, then the prices in the store are such, as if humanity is conquering far space, and for this, urgently need gigantic resources, then the cops on the street stop for no reason at all, offering to be a witness on the detention of drug dealer, and so on constantly. All the time, new adventures. Holland is not like that at all. It is a stable, even-tempered, calm country where I always knew that tomorrow would be the same as yesterday and today, and there was no reason to worry about my situation. It is a territory for families, where couples can easily form unions. And the Dutch themselves are not some kind of crazy, explosive people like Latin Americans, they are like a family. Therefore, we can say that their not too bright climate is a kind of negative compensator for the country's advantages. It can't be all smooth, this world doesn't work that way, there have to be some minuses to balance it out. And the climate of the Netherlands is one of those minuses. But you get used to it after a while, especially when you visit other countries after the Netherlands, and other countries before that, and then you can compare. And in general, this rule, comparison, applies, if not to everything in the world, then to a lot of things. After all, how can you understand where and what is better if you don't have the experience of comparison? No way. The Netherlands is also flat, I haven't seen any mountains here, it's all as flat as a plate. There are forests, but they're well maintained, and you can only enter them for a fee. Yes, there's a fee to enter the forest because it's behind a fence, friends. Everything is arranged around, roads, crossings, passages. Everywhere has been visited by a man, and in the forest, and by the seashore. Strong gusts of wind are also characteristic of Holland. I have heard that sometimes some cyclists are blown directly into water canals, which are plentiful here, as the whole country is dotted with artificial water arteries. In any city and suburb, there are often water channels, large and small, of varying lengths. Boats are a common sight here. It is often possible to see people of different ages floating down the canal with drinks, food, and other items, talking loudly about something. Sometimes there's a rowdy group of young guys or girls, and sometimes it's a quiet group of retirees. But on their own, the Dutch are cheerful, they have all the time some public events, like carnivals and mass festivities, so people they are open and good-natured, but many consider them artificial. Personally, I didn't see this, but I can't say for everyone, because I only write about what I saw myself. Many times I have heard that the Netherlands is prophesied to be flooded, but in my opinion, is that it will not ruin the Dutch, even if there is a partial or complete submersion of the country in the depths of the sea. Of course, I will feel sorry for such a wonderful country, honestly. I sincerely wish the Dutch to continue to prosper and be healthy. I also like their measured way of life and moving around everywhere by bike. Fortunately, they have a well-developed transport infrastructure, bike paths everywhere, cyclists and pedestrians, and a lot of picturesque and cozy places for walking. For example, in the same Brazilian São Paulo, there are almost no parks, although it is a giant city. At the same time, in the Netherlands, parks literally on every corner, wherever you go. I also like the geographical location of this country, which is very convenient. Europe is close at hand, Africa is nearby, and it's comfortable to fly to the American continent. Holland has given me a lot, and I will always be grateful to this country, even though I find it unsuitable for my personal lifestyle. One of the disadvantages is the high cost of living, which requires significant expenses that need to be earned somewhere. Another notable aspect of Holland is the presence of many Polish, Bulgarian, and Turkish workers. With the outbreak of war in Ukraine, they were joined by Ukrainians, who also took over many simple jobs in all European countries, including the Netherlands. There is a lot of work in the Netherlands, and it is literally everywhere. You can go outside and just walk along the street, visit any enterprise in the country and any greenhouse of your choice, and there will certainly be at least one Ukrainian and at least one Pole there. I became such a Ukrainian in Holland. Here I had to change several jobs in a year and a half, about 7, if my memory serves me right. My first job was the most difficult and nervous, because it was ruled by 2 Turkish bosses at the same time. The people there were like passing stars, they appeared for a day or two, after which they disappeared as if they had never been. The conveyor of workers was terrible, no one I knew stayed in this place for long. I remember one day, I was sitting in the buffet in the morning, drinking coffee, when a new batch of workers came in, about 5 people. They were young Polish women, talkative and smiling. The next day, I noticed that they were gone, and new Polish women had arrived in their place. Then, the next morning, the situation repeated itself. And this continued day after day. It suddenly occurred to me where I was. I've worked in places before where people were used like a conveyor belt, but here it was very pronounced. Of course, most of the employees at this company, like me, were stable and worked at the factory every day, but it wasn't a pleasant place. The management's attitude was terrible, the working conditions were poor, the demands were high, and there was no social protection for many of the employees. Unlike me, they were dependent on their salaries and had come to the country for various reasons, so they were willing to endure anything to earn money. I was a refugee at the time, and I had a different situation. I wasn't as dependent on money as they were. I could choose a country, a job, and a place to live. In 2 years, I'll be just as much a migrant worker as these Bulgarians, Turks, and Poles, but back then, I was living in a municipality-owned apartment that I didn't have to pay for. It was easy in many ways, but the work was unbearable. The company, especially our boss, Natalia, who was Polish, while she had a good appearance, she was clearly mentally unstable. And so the 3 of us are working on the line, Vitya, Oleg, and me. Vitya tells us that he wants to make a date with Natalia, but he doesn't know how, because he doesn't speak either Polish or English. Oleg volunteers to help him with advice and begins to explain that Vitya needs to invite Natasha for a walk with the words, "I have a big dick," which means, as Oleg said, "Today is such nice weather." He then went on to describe the phrases he would use to ask Natasha out on a date. "I will show you my dick," which he said translated to, "Let's go for a walk in the park." Luckily, Vitya didn't believe him, because Oleg was recommending all this in a very cheerful manner, and asked me if Oleg was lying to him. I only said that it is not worth saying such things to Natasha, since the meaning of these words is not at all what Oleg told. After that, Vitya decided not to admit his feelings to Natasha. Sometimes I felt sorry for Vitya, because he flirted with almost every woman at work, hoping for their favor. Sometimes it was sad to watch, because he had no sense of self-worth. On the other hand, I could understand him, because modern women have become very difficult to deal with. But it's not easy for women these days to find decent, adequate men. Also, there were a lot of Turkish women at that job, and they often had beautiful names, such as Moonlight and similar poetic names. When I talked to Turkish guys and asked them about the main problem in their personal relationships with Turkish girls, they replied that it was the same as with Ukrainian girls: they need a lot of money and high status. If a guy doesn't have a car and a lot of money, he's almost certainly not going to be considered a life partner, so there can't be a relationship with him. Many Turkish women want a good-looking, wealthy young man. It's normal, but the problem is that not every Turkish guy is like that. And the girls themselves aren't very valuable, honestly. They want this and that, but what have they done to deserve it? These are the questions and complaints I've heard from Turkish guys. It reminds me a lot of Ukrainian girls and their demands. A year and a half later, when I find myself in the countries of Latin America, I will face the same problem from the side of the Latin American women, which will convince me that the problems of all humanity are basically the same everywhere. The nations are like flowers in a field, seemingly so different, but they all experience the same things. For example, my friend from Ukraine, whose name I would prefer to conceal, went to Chile for the sake of a Ukrainian girl with whom he had previously lived for many years in Kharkiv. She wrote to him that she loved him, but when he flew there on a whim and then showed up at her house in Santiago without warning, her sister answered the door and told him that his girlfriend had long since found someone else, a local Chilean with money. Of course, it was unpleasant, because this friend of mine risked his life to get out of Ukraine, following a love attachment to her. And I know a lot of such stories. Real, non-fictional. Don't think that I'm defending guys, but you can't deny the fact that women are too greedy for money, and modern relations have become more market than soul. You me, I you, that's their formula. I lived with Ukrainian refugees for a long time. There were several other young girls living on my floor. They were nice girls, and one of them, her name is Angela, attended a Christian church. And one of the days she invited me to their Christian gathering. It was a unique event, a trendy party in Amsterdam with a large number of Ukrainian attendees. The musicians played live music, and all the songs were about Jesus. I had attended similar gatherings before, but this time, I went out of curiosity and to learn more about Angela, as she was a pretty girl with trendy tattoos and dreadlocks. I don't know where she is now, but I hope she's in good health and in good shape. After dancing with the singing of Jesus, the Son of God, we went to the continuation, a Christian gathering to discuss Bible stories and the revelations of each participant. Everyone shared what they had, but I was more silent and just listened, observing the speakers. I don't argue that I was happy that people spent their time this way, and not in a drunken stupor, in the smoke of grass or in group intercourse, but still I did not feel the grace of God in those moments. Either I am such a sinner, or the format of communication with God did not go, I do not know. But the heart did not respond either during the praise or during the conversation about the biblical events, and yet I was satisfied. After that we returned to The Hague. Although I didn't spend much time at the location, I mostly used it for work and then for studying, reading, and socializing with friends and family. This is how my days were spent, working, longing, and nostalgic for my old life. And you know, I didn't like my old life in many ways, because it was very difficult. Life in Ukraine was already challenging before the war, as the government never cared about its own people. People were treated like cattle and resources. It was more like survival than life. In the last years of my life in Ukraine, due to my mother's illness and low earnings, I sometimes had to take out a bank loan to pay off utility bills, since at that time only my father and I worked, but my mother and brother did not. I remember very well the moments when I received my salary and had to decide whether to buy clothes or pay for our utilities. It was not often possible to enjoy money, because they were constantly in short supply. My salary at the time was around $300, if not less. And everyone around me was struggling, you know, and you had to pay for every service. If you went to the hospital, you had to pay. If you went to any reception, whether it was for payments or paperwork, you had to pay. You had to pay for everything. There was even a period when I couldn't find a job for a year to think about moving to another city or even country. It was during those years that I once again began to consider finding an alternative to Ukraine. However, I still stayed in my home, as I needed to support my family, and I did not want to leave them to fend for themselves. After some time, the Liberation Army forced me to do this, and at that time I was staying in my home and in my own region. I remember once, before I left, I had a dream that I was standing in one of the city's squares, and I saw shells falling from the sky and people dying in the explosions. At the time, it was just a vision, but about 2 years later, it became a reality. The Russians almost completely bombed the city, sparing no one, neither old people, nor women, nor children, killing in large numbers both civilians and soldiers. This is a fact that cannot be changed. They came and destroyed everything. That's the harsh truth. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, I thought Russia was a great country, but this war changed how I feel about Russians, about war, and changed how I see the world. I understood why people are so afraid of war, why the hungry cannot understand the well-fed, and why Russia is always so cruel. Since then, I no longer consider Russia a great power, because I have realized how cruel, bloodthirsty, merciless, stupid, inhuman, and worthless it can be, and how it has been stained with the blood of generations. All these stories about the great power are just nonsense. I suddenly understood why the Chechen commanders fought against Russia, why Georgia was at war with it. For me it also became an enemy formation with imperial tendencies, and many of my beliefs concerning it took on a very different color. Russia is ruled by gangsters, thieves, and murderers, which is why its policies never change. With this revelation about Russia, another disappointment of life came to me. The idea that I blindly believed in collapsed like a cardboard box. I knew that the regime in Russia was fascist, but I didn't think it was that bad. However, the sheep continue to praise Putin and his group. The TV does its job after all. I was liberated from my difficult life and offered the opportunity to become a member of a free country, but I chose a different path. Nevertheless, I missed my home, my family, and my old way of life. I was now outside my own land, but I was not broken. I believed in my mission, and I knew that I had survived and would continue to survive. I got out of this swamp. From now on, I had to decide where to live, how to live, and find myself in a new world that was sinking deeper into the depths of war. It is what it is. In general, I'll tell you this, friends, life is an arena of disappointments, and you need to be able to keep your face in it, and your spirits up, undaunted by anything. Life is a constant challenge, a struggle, and resistance, which is why I love it.